also strongly believe that we want to make sure the No Child Left Behind Act continues to work. You measure every day. That's why you're successful business people. I mean, you know what your business is doing. I believe we ought to extend that same principle to our public schools and ask a simple question. Can a child read at grade level? And in order to determine that, that's why you measure. And if the answer is yes, we all say, great. If the answer is no, the question will be, then what are you going to do about it? And so the principle behind the No Child Left Behind Act is to set high standards, believe every child can learn, and measure to see if we're getting results. And Congress need not weaken such a good piece of legislation.
How do you feel the No Child Left Behind Act has affected schools across the country?
So I think it's done a couple of things. The first one is that it forced schools to stop ignoring certain populations, which, it was something that occurred across the board. If our special education kids weren't performing, we didn't have to really worry about them. If African Americans weren't performing, we didn't have to worry about them. So on the plus side, it's held us accountable to make sure that every kid learns. On the downside, it's created a culture of testing where, everybody, is concerned about how well we perform on a standardized test, which means that we sort of play to the lowest common denominator as opposed to really teaching our kids to think critically and, to ask the right questions about why. And so it's pushed us to focus more on fact finding as opposed to, challenging the existing status quo. So I remember when No Child Left Behind was enacted. I was actually still teaching at that time. And so in the state I worked in, Virginia, they already had a high stakes test. So from my standpoint, there really wasn't a big change. It didn't impact us at all. What you do see though is that it's changed the way we view certain parts of teaching now, and it's changed the way some teachers are prepared. Data is a bigger part of our business than what it ever was. And understanding how to get kids successful with test taking is a bigger part. Whereas, it probably would have focused more on the idea of professional development. You're not forced to think about like how is this professional development going to improve test scores. Whereas before, when I was teaching, it would be, here are some tips that can help your kids be successful, or here are some tips that might serve the population of the school that you're going with, and nobody ever equated that to how it's going to improve test scores. So I think it's impacting on teaching is that way. In terms of how it's affected higher education institutions, it's made them focus on data-driven instruction also. So you see, whereas when I first started my graduate program in '99, there wasn't an emphasis on data-driven instruction unless that school wanted to focus on it. Now, you don't really have a choice but to focus on it because that's a part of the business.
This week, I went to Memphis, Tennessee, where I spoke to the graduating class of Booker T. Washington High School. Graduations are always happy occasions, but this commencement was especially hopeful because of just how much the kids at Booker T. Washington High School had overcome. This is a school in the middle of a tough neighborhood in South Memphis. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of poverty. And just a few years ago, only about half of the students at the school graduated. Just a handful went off to college each year. But folks came together to change all that. Under the leadership of a dynamic principal and devoted teachers, they started special academies for ninth graders because they found that that's when a lot of kids were lost. They made it possible for students to take AP classes or vocational courses. Most importantly, they didn't just change the curriculum. They created a culture that prizes hard work and discipline, and that shows every student that they matter. Today, 4 out of 5 students at the school earn a diploma. 70% continue their education, many the first in their families to go to college. So Booker T. Washington High School is no longer a story about what's gone wrong in education. It's a story about how we can set it right. We need to encourage this kind of change all across America. We need to reward the reforms that are driven not by Washington, but by principals and teachers and parents. That's how we'll make progress in education, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And that's the guiding principle of the Race to the Top competition my administration started 2 years ago. The idea is simple. If states show that they're serious about reform, we'll show them the money. And it's already making a difference throughout the country. In Tennessee, where I met those students, they've launched an innovative residency program so that new teachers can be mentored by veteran educators. In Oregon, Michigan, and elsewhere, grants are supporting the work of teachers who are lengthening the school day, offering more specialized classes, and making the changes necessary to improve struggling schools. Our challenge now is to allow all 50 states to benefit from the success of Race to the Top. We need to promote reform that gets results while encouraging communities to figure out what's best for their kids. That's why it's so important that Congress replace No Child Left Behind this year, so schools have that flexibility. Reform just can't wait. And if anyone doubts this, they ought to head to Booker T. Washington High. They ought to meet the inspiring young people who overcame so much and worked so hard to earn their diplomas in a school that believed in their promise and gave them the opportunity to succeed. We need to give every child in America that chance. That's why education reform matters. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a hard one to say. I think on a surface level, like, yeah, you want to say that kids benefited from it. You want to think that our students are performing better on standardized tests, that we're being held accountable, and so that we're focusing our attention on these groups. So from an altruistic standpoint, like, yes, I want to believe that it does. Do I believe that the product is better? I don't necessarily think so. I don't think we've made it's netted the gains in education that we expected. And I think, the schools that were teaching well before No Child Left Behind are still teaching well, and the schools that aren't teaching well are still struggling to figure out how to teach better. I don't see us developing the critical thinkers, but if you look over the history of education, ever since we've started education, there's been this assault on how good education is, and so I don't know if you want to look at there's a guy by the name of Tyack who talks about that. It's Tyack, but I don't think that it's improved education the way we thought it would, and I don't think it's I think the premise behind No Child Left Behind was to level the playing field and make sure that everybody was on an equal field. And we can see just by the recession and everything else that's taking place that it's not having the impact that we thought it would. So I guess that's it.